The Indiana class established the template for American naval power in the decade before the dreadnought revolution made every preceding battleship obsolete. Authorized under the Naval Act of 1890, all three ships, USS Indiana, USS Massachusetts, and USS Oregon, were deliberately sized for coastal defense rather than oceanic projection. Their 351-foot hull was noticeably shorter than contemporary British capital ships, a compromise that made them marginally seaworthy but violently wet in any heavy sea state. The 13-inch main battery sat in twin turrets fore and aft. Elevation was limited to 15 degrees, capping effective range at roughly 9,000 yards. 8 secondary 8-inch guns occupied 2 more turrets amidships, a feature that reflected genuine doctrinal uncertainty about long-range gunnery accuracy. Oregon's 14,000-mile voyage from Puget Sound around Cape Horn to reinforce the Atlantic Squadron before Santiago in 1898 became an inadvertent argument for the Panama Canal's necessity. At Santiago, Indiana and Oregon participated in the destruction of Cervera's squadron. Their firepower was decisive, their speed was not. The 15-knot maximum allowed Cristobal Colon to run for nearly 4 hours before Oregon overtook her. The lesson that a slow battleship could not catch a fleeing cruiser was registered but not yet resolved. All three were scrapped by 1921 under Washington Naval Treaty constraints. A one-ship class, USS Iowa, represented a deliberate speed experiment against the Indiana template. The Bureau of Construction added 100 tons of displacement and extended the waterplane to achieve 17 knots, 2 knots over Indiana, at the cost of a reduced armor belt. The Bureau of Ordnance, uncomfortable with that trade, mounted a 12-inch rather than 13-inch main battery to compensate for the thinner protection. The result was a ship faster than her predecessors but marginally less protected and less heavily armed. Iowa served briefly in the Spanish-American War, stationed in the North Atlantic as part of the Flying Squadron under Commodore Winfield Scott Schley. She did not participate at Santiago. Poor strategic deployment kept her in reserve at Hampton Roads while Oregon and Indiana engaged. The missed action amplified internal Navy debates about battleship design priorities, protection versus speed versus firepower, a triangular tension that would persist through the Iowa class of the 1940s. Post-war, Iowa served in the Asiatic Fleet and saw training duty. The Navy expended her as a target ship in 1923 off Pearl Harbor, observing bomb damage from Army Air Service aircraft under Brigadier General Billy Mitchell's program. Her hull resisted longer than expected. The lesson was recorded. It was not acted upon for nearly 2 more decades. The Kearsarge class introduced the superimposed turret arrangement, placing an 8-inch twin turret directly atop each 13-inch twin turret. That would prove one of the more problematic design choices of the pre-dreadnought era. The logic was spatial efficiency. Both calibers could train on the same bearing simultaneously. The reality was muzzle blast damage. Firing the upper 8-inch guns while the lower 13-inch guns were elevated created destructive overpressure that cracked the 8-inch barbette structures over time. USS Kearsarge and USS Kentucky were completed in 1900 and served primarily in the North Atlantic Squadron. Neither saw combat action equivalent to the Spanish-American warships entering service after that conflict's conclusion. Both participated in the Great White Fleet circumnavigation between 1907 and 1909 under President Theodore Roosevelt's order, a demonstration covering 46,000 nautical miles. The superimposed turret defect was documented thoroughly during Great White Fleet operations. Repair costs were significant. Kentucky was scrapped in 1920, Kearsarge was converted to a crane vessel, redesignated AB-1, and served in that capacity until 1955, outlasting virtually every other pre-dreadnought hull by decades. The superimposed turret arrangement was not revisited in American capital ship design. The Illinois class abandoned the Kearsarge superimposed turret experiment and returned to a conventional layout, substituting the 8-inch secondary battery with 14 6-inch guns in casemate mounts along the hull sides. This was a retrograde choice in one sense. 6-inch guns carried less punch than 8-inch, but a practical one. Casemate-mounted weapons were easier to service, more reliable under battle conditions, and cheaper to manufacture. The Bureau of Ordnance favored rate of fire over individual shell weight at intermediate ranges. USS Illinois, USS Alabama, and USS Wisconsin served throughout the early 1900s as the core of the North Atlantic Fleet. All three participated in the Great White Fleet circumnavigation. Alabama suffered a significant machinery casualty during the voyage, requiring emergency repairs at Callao, Peru, a logistical episode that strengthened arguments for permanent overseas coaling and repair stations. Wisconsin was renamed Prairie State in 1921 to free the name for new construction, serving as a training ship for Naval Reserve midshipmen through World War II until 1947. Illinois followed a similar renaming path. All three hulls were scrapped under Washington Treaty provisions. Their 13-inch guns were preserved at various shore facilities for test and training purposes through the 1930s. Authorized partly as political response to the destruction of the armored cruiser Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898, the second Maine class represented a meaningful increase in both displacement and speed. At 18 knots, Missouri and Ohio were the fastest American battleships yet commissioned, achieved through improved triple expansion engines producing 16,000 indicated horsepower. The reduction from 13-inch to 12-inch main guns was accepted in exchange for a longer, finer hull form, enabling the speed increase. USS Missouri gained lasting notoriety on April 13, 1904, when a powder charge ignited during a turret drill at Oyster Bay, New York, killing 36 men. The explosion was traced to a gun crew loading drill with live powder bags stored improperly near an open access hatch. The Bureau of Ordnance revised powder handling procedures fleet-wide within 60 days. Missouri's turret was rebuilt. The ship returned to service within a year. All three ships participated in the Great White Fleet voyage. Ohio was transferred to the Reserve Fleet in 1909 and saw minimal further service. Maine was briefly considered for retention as a training ship, but was scrapped in 1920. The class's 18-knot speed was useful intermediate data, demonstrating that larger battleships could achieve meaningful speed without reverting to cruiser-type hull ratios, data that informed the Connecticut class that followed. The Virginia class was the last American pre-dreadnought design to include substantial secondary caliber turrets alongside the main battery. 8-inch guns occupied twin turrets amidships without superimposition. The Bureau of Construction argued mixed caliber batteries remained viable for engagements under 5,000 yards. The Bureau of Ordnance was increasingly skeptical. The argument was rendered moot by HMS Dreadnought's commissioning in February 1906, which made every mixed-caliber capital ship in every navy immediately obsolescent. All 5 ships, Virginia, Nebraska, Georgia, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, completed while naval architects worldwide were recalculating every assumption about capital ship design. They were modern when laid down, they were second line when commissioned. The Great White Fleet voyage in 1907 to 1909 included all five, a diplomatic exercise that required battleships regardless of their tactical relevance. Virginia and New Jersey were expended as bombing targets in 1923 during General Billy Mitchell's much-publicized aerial attack demonstrations off the Virginia Capes. Both ships sank under bomb damage, though conditions, stationary, unmanned, undefended, were criticized as non-representative. Test results were selectively interpreted by both sides of the battleship versus air power debate for 2 more decades. Nebraska, Georgia, and Rhode Island were scrapped under Washington Treaty terms. The Connecticut class was the largest and most powerful American pre-dreadnought design, and the last. 6 ships completed between 1906 and 1908 at a combined cost exceeding $35 million, all entering service knowing HMS Dreadnought had already redefined the category. USS Connecticut served as flagship of the Great White Fleet during the entire 14-month circumnavigation, making her the most prominent American warship of the pre-dreadnought era, even as dreadnought construction overtook her class's relevance. The 16-gun battery, 4 12-inch, 8 8-inch, 12 7-inch, was the most complex fire control problem any American battleship crew had yet faced. Simultaneous engagement with multiple calibers at different ranges required trained spotters at 3 separate control positions. Fire control doctrine was still developing. The ships were commissioned before a coherent solution existed, and gunnery scores remained mediocre through the class's first years of service. All 6 served in the Atlantic through World War I, performing convoy escort and patrol duties. Minnesota struck a mine off Fire Island in September 1918, suffering moderate flooding but no fatalities, the only combat damage sustained by the class. All 6 were scrapped in 1923. They outlasted their relevance by 17 years, their 12-inch guns reduced to shore, battery and test range use. The Connecticut class closed an era that had already closed without them. American designers at the Bureau of Construction and Repair independently developed the all-big-gun centerline turret concept while HMS Dreadnought was under construction, a coincidence of institutional logic rather than espionage. The result was USS South Carolina and USS Michigan, the first American dreadnoughts, authorized in 1905 and commissioned in 1910 after construction extended by congressional budget disputes. They were smaller than Dreadnought at 16,000 tons, but their super-firing turret arrangement allowed all 8 12-inch guns to fire on either broadside simultaneously. Dreadnought could not achieve this. The super-firing arrangement solved the broadside problem at the cost of structural complexity. The barbette and barbette trunk of the upper turret had to be carried down through the lower turret's working space, a mechanical challenge that added weight and required meticulous maintenance to prevent binding under rotation. Both ships experienced turret training difficulties in early service, resolved through redesigned roller paths in 1912. South Carolina and Michigan served in the Atlantic and participated in the occupation of Veracruz, Mexico in 1914. Neither saw action during World War I. The Navy kept its dreadnoughts concentrated in home waters, partly from fuel logistics concerns and partly from strategic caution after Jutland. Both were scrapped under the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty. They were among the first American capital ships sacrificed to the tonnage limits. The Delaware class introduced the 10-gun, 12-inch main battery in 5 twin super-firing turrets on the center line. The Bureau used the longer hull to dramatically increase speed, 21 knots through Parsons direct-drive steam turbines, producing 25,000 shaft horsepower. USS Delaware was the first American battleship to deploy turbine propulsion as standard. USS North Dakota was fitted with experimental Curtiss turbines with reduction gearing to compare efficiency. North Dakota's geared turbines proved 12% more fuel efficient than Delaware's direct drive installation, a finding that influenced propulsion selection for subsequent classes. Both ships operated in the Atlantic Fleet through World War I, with Delaware crossing to Britain in December 1917 as part of Battleship Division 9, attached to the British Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow, the first American dreadnoughts to operate in a European theatre. Delaware participated in escorting the German High Seas Fleet to internment at Scapa Flow in November 1918. North Dakota, retained for turbine development testing, did not cross to Europe. Delaware was scrapped in 1924. North Dakota survived as a target ship until 1931, expended in aerial bombing tests gathering data on bomb damage thresholds for capital ship armor. The conclusions remained contested within the Navy's senior leadership. The Florida class was a modest evolution of Delaware, slightly heavier, marginally better protected, with an expanded secondary battery of 16 5-inch guns. Both ships deployed geared turbines as standard, settling the Delaware propulsion debate. USS Florida joined Battleship Division 9 at Scapa Flow in 1917. USS Utah operated in the same assignment. Both participated in the armistice procession escorting the German fleet to surrender in November 1918. Utah was present at the Veracruz occupation in 1914, contributing naval gunfire support when American Marines came ashore. The 12-inch guns fired approximately 300 rounds during the landing, combat experience in naval gunfire coordination that the Navy's Fire Control School incorporated into subsequent doctrine. Florida was converted to oil-burning configuration in 1925 and scrapped in 1931 under Washington Treaty tonnage limits. Utah's fate was more significant. Converted to a target and training ship in 1931, she was moored at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, where she was struck by 2 aerial torpedoes and capsized within 12 minutes. 58 crew members died. Utah's hull remains on the harbor floor as a designated memorial, one of 2 Pearl Harbor battleship losses never raised. She is the least discussed casualty of that morning, a training ship that died in a battle she was no longer equipped to fight. The Wyoming class expanded the American 12-inch battery to 12 guns in 6 super-firing twin turrets, the maximum number practicable on a single center line without producing an excessively long, narrow hull. USS Wyoming and USS Arkansas were the last American battleships armed with the 12-inch gun. Both ships served with Battleship Division 9 at Scapa Flow in World War I. Arkansas's gunnery during exercises with the Grand Fleet was assessed as below British standards, prompting revised fire control training protocols in 1918. Arkansas survived both world wars. She provided naval gunfire support during the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, firing on German coastal batteries at Omaha Beach, 12-inch shells representing 1912 technology directed against 1944 Wehrmacht fortifications. She also bombarded Iwo Jima and Cherbourg with the same guns installed at her commissioning 3 decades earlier. Wyoming was converted to a training ship in 1931 and spent World War II training anti-aircraft gun crews. Both ships were expended in Operation Crossroads nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll in July 1946. Arkansas was sunk in the Baker underwater detonation, the submerged 21-kiloton blast that lifted her entire stern from the water before she plunged. Wyoming had already been scrapped. The Baker shot consumed 30-year-old steel and 30-year-old doctrine in the same instant. The New York class introduced the 14-inch 45 caliber Maine gun, adding approximately 30% more shell weight per broadside over the 12-inch battery. USS New York and USS Texas deployed reciprocating triple expansion engines rather than turbines, a controversial reversion motivated by concerns about turbine fuel consumption at cruising speed. The decision compromised speed and plant efficiency. Neither ship was ever considered fast by contemporary standards, and the choice was not repeated in subsequent classes. Texas holds a set of records no other American warship matches. She was the first U.S. Navy vessel to mount anti-aircraft guns, the first to control gunfire from a central fire control director, and the first to launch an aircraft from a fixed shipboard catapult. She served in both World Wars, at Scapa Flow with the Grand Fleet in 1917 to 1918, at Normandy on June 6, 1944, providing fire support at Omaha Beach, and at Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945. Texas's Normandy fire mission involved direct fire at 800 yards against German gun emplacements, point-blank range that exposed her 1914-era armor to anti-tank fire, but suppressed the position long enough for infantry to advance. She was designated a Texas State Memorial in 1948. New York was expended at Bikini Atoll in 1948, surviving the Baker shot only to be sunk by gunfire and aerial attack, deemed too radioactive to tow to a breaking yard. Texas remains afloat in Galveston following a major 2023 restoration. The Nevada class introduced the all-or-nothing armor philosophy, concentrating protection on a single hardened citadel surrounding the magazines, propulsion, and turret bases, leaving bow and stern lightly armored and accepting their loss. Bureau of Construction analysts determined that light splinter damage to unprotected areas was survivable. Penetration of the citadel was fatal. By concentrating weight in the citadel, the armor belt could be made thicker without increasing overall displacement. USS Nevada was struck by 1 torpedo and 5 bombs during the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941. She got underway, the only battleship to do so during the attack, and attempted to exit the harbor. Japanese aircraft shifted attack priority specifically to Nevada to sink her in the channel and block the harbor entrance. She was deliberately beached at Hospital Point to prevent this. Her damage control, executed under active attack by a crew of 2,000, has been studied at the Naval War College since. USS Oklahoma was struck by at least 9 torpedoes within minutes and capsized at her moorings. 429 men died. 32 were rescued from air pockets inside the inverted hull over the following days. Oklahoma was raised in 1943 but deemed not worth reconditioning. She sank under tow in 1947. 540 miles from Pearl Harbor in a storm that ended her second voyage. Nevada was repaired and served at Normandy, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, before being expended at Bikini. The Pennsylvania class added a third 14-inch triple turret to the Nevada arrangement, bringing the main battery to 12 guns, the heaviest broadside of any American battleship to that point. The triple turret required precise timing of independent firing mechanisms to prevent interference. The Bureau of Ordnance solved the independent elevation problem with separate breach mechanisms synchronized by a single fire control input. The arrangement worked reliably but required more sophisticated training at the turret captain level. USS Pennsylvania was in dry dock at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the only battleship present that was not in the water. Struck by one bomb, she suffered moderate casualties and was repaired to serve extensively in the Pacific, the Aleutians Campaign, Leyte Gulf, Lingayen Gulf, and Okinawa. A kamikaze strike in August 1945, 4 days after the Nagasaki bombing, sent her to Puget Sound for repairs that were never completed. USS Arizona remains the defining casualty of December 7, 1941. A single 800-kilogram armor-piercing bomb, converted from a 16-inch naval shell, penetrated her forward deck and detonated the forward magazine at approximately 8:06 in the morning. The explosion was heard 35 miles away. Of her 1,177 deaths, the largest single ship loss in American naval history, approximately 900 remain entombed in the hull. Arizona is a national memorial. Pennsylvania was expended at Bikini Atoll in 1948. The New Mexico class completed the standard battleship concept, a doctrine requiring that all American battleships operate as a tactically interchangeable fleet unit with identical speed, turning radius, and fuel consumption, to allow coordinated maneuvering at 21 knots. The standard concept sacrificed individual ship optimization for fleet cohesion, reflecting War Plan Orange's assumption that a decisive engagement with the Japanese battle fleet would be fought in the Western Pacific after a long transit. 3 ships could execute fleet maneuvers as predictably as 30 if they all moved identically. USS New Mexico was fitted with turbo-electric drive, electric motors powered by steam turbine generators rather than turbines directly connected to shafts. This arrangement allowed precise speed control and eliminated reduction gearing complexity. New Mexico's turbo-electric plant worked reliably. The system was subsequently adopted for the Tennessee and California classes. All 3 ships served extensively in the Pacific during World War II. New Mexico was struck by a kamikaze at Lingayen Gulf on January 6, 1945, killing 30 men. A second kamikaze hit her off Okinawa in May 1945, killing 54. Mississippi was present at the Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, the last battleship versus battleship gun engagement in history, where she fired the final salvo. All 3 were scrapped in 1947. The standard concept had worked exactly as designed and was retired without a direct successor doctrine. The Tennessee class was the refinement of the New Mexico design. Similar displacement, identical standard speed, improved fire control, upgraded armor distribution. Both ships used turbo-electric drive. The 14-inch 50-caliber gun produced a muzzle velocity of 2,700 feet per second, giving shells a maximum range of 36,000 yards at full elevation, approximately 20 miles. The 50-caliber barrel length was the longest 14-inch weapon in the American inventory. USS California was among the 8 battleships at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, moored alone without a paired ship's protection. 2 torpedo hits flooded her forward spaces. A bomb hit destroyed her communications center. Crew members attempted to counter-flooded to maintain trim, but progressive flooding could not be stopped. California sank slowly over 3 days, her quarterdeck submerging last. She was refloated in April 1942 and extensively reconstructed, emerging in 1944 with new anti-aircraft batteries, tripod masts, and an altered silhouette. USS Tennessee was moored inboard of West Virginia at Pearl Harbor, protected from torpedo hits by her neighbor's hull. Damaged by 2 bomb hits and fire but remaining afloat, she was also rebuilt to a new configuration. Both ships participated in the Battle of Surigao Strait, firing 14-inch shells at the Japanese Southern Force at 22,800-yard range in the last surface gunnery exchange between capital ships. Both were scrapped in 1959, the last standard battleships to survive the post-war drawdown. The Colorado class introduced the 16-inch main gun to American service, substituting 8 16-inch 45 caliber weapons for the 12 14-inch guns of preceding classes. Shell weight increased from 1,400 to 2,100 pounds, a 50% increase in projectile mass. The reduced gun count accepted a smaller broadside salvo weight in exchange for dramatically greater per-hit effect and maximum range. Bureau of Ordnance calculations showed that a single 16-inch hit could penetrate any contemporary armor at battle ranges. A planned 4th ship, USS Washington, was 75% complete when the Washington Naval Treaty was signed in 1922. She was expended as a target in November 1924. Gunfire and aerial bombing attacks on a nearly finished warship, representing $15 million in expenditure, deliberately sunk to comply with tonnage limits. The Navy documented the sinking to establish damage thresholds for 16-inch shell hits on 16-inch armor. The data was useful. The loss was not. USS West Virginia was struck by 7 torpedoes and 2 bombs at Pearl Harbor, sinking to the harbor floor. Her survival upright stemmed from Ensign Delano's rapid counter-flood decision. She was raised, rebuilt, and returned to service in 1944, and participated in Surigao Strait. Colorado escaped Pearl Harbor only because she was under overhaul at Puget Sound. Maryland was present but trapped outboard of Oklahoma, receiving 2 bomb hits but remaining afloat. All 3 were scrapped in 1959. The 1920 design South Dakota class would have been the most powerful battleships in the world at their projected commissioning. 6 ships authorized under the Naval Act of 1916, with design finalized in 1917 to 1919 following Jutland analysis. The 12 16-inch guns in 4 triple turrets would have delivered a broadside of 25,200 pounds, heavier than any contemporary capital ship. Speed of 23 knots would have exceeded any standard class hull by 2 knots. Construction began on all 6 hulls in 1920 to 1921. Washington Naval Treaty negotiations concluded in February 1922 before any of them reached 30% completion. All 6 were ordered demolished on the slipways or at building stages, representing approximately $67 million in expended and forfeited construction costs. Steel, already cut, machined, and assembled, was sold for scrap. Some hull sections were used as breakwaters. The names were reserved for future construction. The cancellation had a direct intellectual consequence. Naval architects who had designed the 1920 South Dakotas went on to design the Washington Treaty battleships of the 1930s. The experience of working within the treaty's 35,000-ton limit while preserving maximum firepower and protection informed every subsequent American capital ship design. The cancelled ships' blueprints were not wasted. They became the foundation for what replaced them. The North Carolina class broke the 15-year construction pause imposed by the Washington Naval Treaty, emerging as the first American battleships laid down after restrictions relaxed under the Second London Naval Treaty's escalator clause in 1937. The design process was protracted. The Bureau of Construction submitted 16 separate design iterations between 1935 and 1937, debating 12 14-inch guns versus 9 16-inch guns within the treaty's 35,000-ton limit. Japan's invocation of the escalator clause resolved the caliber debate in favor of the 16-inch. USS Washington became the only American battleship to sink an enemy capital ship in a surface gun duel during World War II. On the night of November 14th to 15th, 1942, northeast of Guadalcanal, Washington engaged the Japanese battleship Kirishima at a range of 8,400 yards, firing a salvo approximately every 45 seconds. 7 16-inch and approximately 45-inch shells struck Kirishima within 7 minutes. She capsized within 3 hours. Washington's own damage, 0. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes of firing. USS North Carolina was struck by a Japanese submarine torpedo on September 15, 1942, taking a hit that opened a 32 by 18-foot hole in her bow. She maintained 25 knots, reached Tonga for emergency repairs within 2 weeks, and returned to operations with 5 crew members dead, a damage control performance that validated the all-or-nothing armor concept under real combat conditions. She earned 15 battle stars during the Pacific War. North Carolina is preserved at Wilmington as a memorial ship. The South Dakota class compressed North Carolina's firepower into a hull 48 feet shorter, achieving better armor protection at the same treaty displacement through a tighter, denser internal arrangement. The design traded interior habitability and crew comfort for tactical advantage. Machinery spaces were cramped, damage control access was restricted, and the ships ran hot in Pacific waters. 25-inch dual-purpose guns and an anti-aircraft battery that reached 96 40mm Bofors barrels by 1945 made the class a formidable air defense platform. USS South Dakota fought at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal on November 14th to 15th, 1942, suffering a serious electrical failure that left her maneuvering without fire control. She absorbed at least 26 shell hits from Japanese cruisers, while Washington engaged Kirishima, a night that produced both the Navy's greatest battleship victory and one of its most frustrating equipment failures. South Dakota's battle damage required 3 months of repair. USS Massachusetts fired the first American 16-inch shells in anger during Operation Torch in November 1942, engaging the unfinished French battleship Jean Bart at Casablanca. USS Alabama and Massachusetts are preserved as museum ships in their namesake states. Indiana and South Dakota were scrapped in 1962. Indiana's name had been applied to both the 1895 pre-dreadnought and the 1942 super-dreadnought, a continuity of nomenclature across a 50-year span that bracketed the entire battleship era. The Iowa class was the only American battleship design that abandoned the standard speed constraint, pushing to 33 knots through a machinery plant producing 212,000 shaft horsepower from 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers driving 4 General Electric turbines. The hull was lengthened to 887 feet to contain that plant and to provide the waterplane necessary for speed. The 16-inch 50 caliber gun fired a 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell to a maximum range of 42,345 yards. At 23 miles, a single salvo contained over 24,000 pounds of steel, moving at supersonic velocity. USS Missouri carried the most consequential document of the 20th century on her teak deck. The Japanese instrument of surrender was signed on her main deck on September 2, 1945, with General Douglas MacArthur presiding. She was reactivated 3 times: Korea from 1950 to 1953, Lebanon crisis in 1983 on standby, and the Gulf War in 1990 to 1991, where she fired Tomahawk cruise missiles into Iraq on January 17, 1991, and later fired 16-inch shells at Iraqi artillery positions in Kuwait. USS New Jersey holds the distinction of more combat deployments than any other American battleship: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and Lebanon. The Iowa class 1980s reactivation, ordered by Secretary of the Navy John Lehman under President Reagan's 600-ship Navy initiative, added Tomahawk and Harpoon missile batteries to all 4 hulls. The final decommissioning, Iowa, in 1990, closed the American battleship era permanently. No replacement was ever built. No replacement was authorized. 2 additional Iowa-class hulls were authorized and begun but never completed. B-65 Illinois was cancelled on August 11, 1945, 3 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, while her keel was barely laid. The decision required no elaborate analysis. The strategic landscape had shifted in an afternoon. Illinois' contract was terminated, her steel redistributed to other programs, her name retired without ceremony. BB-66. Kentucky had a longer, stranger career. Laid down on December 6, 1942, one day before the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, she was construction paused in 1946 at approximately 19% completion, suspended again multiple times through the late 1940s and early 1950s as the Navy debated guided missile conversion studies. At one point, Kentucky was considered for conversion to a guided missile battleship, replacing her 16-inch turrets with surface-to-air and surface-to-surface missile batteries. The conversion was estimated to cost more than new construction. It was abandoned. Kentucky's bow section was removed and welded onto USS Wisconsin in 1956, after Wisconsin suffered a collision with the destroyer USS Eaton that sheared 68 feet from her bow. The transplant was completed in 16 days and 16 hours, the largest emergency repair in battleship history. Kentucky's remaining hull was sold for scrapping in 1958. Her bow sailed for another 35 years on Wisconsin. The last piece of the last built American battleship hull was decommissioned in Norfolk in 1991. The Montana class was the final American battleship design. and the only post-treaty design that made no concession to Panama Canal beam limits. At 100 to 21 feet wide, the Montanas could not transit the canal, accepting strategic inflexibility in exchange for armor and firepower the Iowa class could not match. The 12 16-inch 50 caliber guns in 4 triple turrets would have delivered a 32,400-pound broadside. The waterline armor belt was designed at 16.1 inches thick. The class was designed explicitly to defeat any contemporary battleship then existing or under construction. All 5 hulls, Montana, Ohio, Maine, New Hampshire, and Louisiana, were authorized in the Two-Ocean Navy Act of July 1940. None was ever laid down. The Navy suspended Montana-class construction in May 1942 to redirect shipyard capacity to carrier construction following the losses of Lexington and Yorktown in the Coral Sea and Midway battles. A 70,000-ton battleship required the same shipyard resources as 2 fleet carriers. The carriers won the argument by winning the battles. The cancellation was made permanent in July 1943. The Montana class represents the maximum theoretical expression of the battleship concept, cancelled before it was built because the concept it expressed had already been surpassed. 5 names, 5 complete design packages, 5 keels, never cut. The most powerful battleships ever designed by the United States exist only on paper. A final statement about what the battleship could have been, issued at the exact moment the battleship ceased to matter.